Tiffany Moss. In October 2013, paramedics responded to an apartment in Lawrenceville, Georgia, where a child had reportedly stopped breathing. What they found inside a galvanized steel trash can would haunt investigators for years. The body of a young girl, set ablaze with charcoal and lighter fluid, weighing just 32 pounds, the average weight of a toddler. Imani Gabrielle Moss was born in April 2003 to a mother who struggled with addiction and surrendered parental rights shortly after birth. Her father, Emin Moss, held sole custody and married Tiffany Moss in July 2009. For a time, Imani had a family. She had a stepmother who worked as a preschool teacher at Freedom Christian Church. She had 2 younger step-siblings to grow up beside. But something dark was taking root inside that apartment in Gwinnett County. Georgia's Division of Family and Children's Services became involved. The couple completed parenting classes, and despite the red flags, Imani was returned to the home. The system failed her. On October 28, 2013, Imani took her last breath inside that apartment. While Tiffany's 2 biological children remained healthy and well-fed, Imani had been systematically denied nourishment for weeks. When her small body finally gave out, Tiffany turned to her husband and told him they could not call for help. They had to hide what they had done. For several days, Imani's body remained in the apartment. Then Emin purchased a trash can, charcoal, and lighter fluid from Home Depot. They doused the child with accelerant and set her remains on fire, placing the container outside their residence. He initially reported Imani as a runaway. On November 2, 2013, police discovered her body. The medical examiner confirmed what the evidence already suggested. This child had been starved to death, and the signs of prolonged suffering covered her small frame. How does a woman who once taught preschoolers in a church commit such an act against her own stepdaughter? Prosecutors had their own answer. District Attorney Danny Porter called Tiffany an evil stepmother who viewed Imani as a nuisance, as someone disposable. He described it as a Cinderella story gone horribly wrong. The state indicted her on 6 charges, including malice and felony offenses related to the child's death and the concealment of her remains. Emin Moss cooperated with authorities. In 2015, he pleaded guilty to felony charges and received life without parole in exchange for his testimony against Tiffany. He remains incarcerated at Smith State Prison in Glenville, Georgia. Tiffany's trial began on April 15, 2019, in Gwinnett County Superior Court, before Judge George Hutchinson. What happened next left the courtroom stunned. Tiffany chose to represent herself. She offered no opening statement. She did not cross-examine any of the 18 prosecution witnesses. She presented no defense whatsoever. When the judge asked if she wished to speak, she typically answered with 2 words. No, Your Honor. Standby counsel from Georgia's Office of the Capital Defender sat in the gallery, unable to help a defendant who refused their assistance. Prior to trial, they had filed motions noting that neuropsychological testing showed damage to regions of her brain responsible for executive function and decision-making. The Georgia Supreme Court declined to hear a pretrial appeal challenging the judge's decision to allow self-representation. On April 29, 2019, after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 6 counts. 2 days later, after approximately 2.5 hours of deliberation, the same jury sentenced Tiffany Moss to death by lethal injection. She became the first person sentenced to death in Georgia in over 5 years. In January 2024, Gwinnett County Superior Court Judge Karen Byers denied a motion for a new trial, ruling that Moss had intelligently and knowingly invoked her right to self-representation. Her case is expected to proceed through the automatic appellate review process to the Georgia Supreme Court. As of April 2026, Tiffany Moss remains the only woman on Georgia's death row. She is housed at Arundel State Prison in Habersham County. No execution date has been scheduled. The evil stepmother narrative may have provided prosecutors with a framework, but what happened to Imani Moss was not a fairy tale. It was a system failure, a pattern of abuse that escalated until a child paid with her life. And while Georgia has only one woman awaiting execution, Texas has its own case that shocked a nation. Taylor Renee Parker. On the morning of October 9, 2020, a Texas state trooper pulled over a vehicle for speeding and erratic driving near DeKalb. Behind the wheel sat a woman performing CPR on a newborn infant in her lap, the umbilical cord still appearing to emerge from her body. She claimed the baby was hers. Within the hour, investigators would discover that baby was not hers, and the real mother was lying face down in a pool of blood more than 30 miles away in New Boston, Bowie County. Reagan Michelle Simmons Hancock was 21 years old and approximately 35 weeks pregnant when Taylor Renee Parker arrived at her home that morning. Reagan's young daughter was present in the residence. Reagan knew Parker as an acquaintance, a freelance photographer who had captured her engagement and wedding photos the year before. What happened inside that home defied comprehension. Medical examiners documented 113 sharp force injuries across Reagan's body, including 15 stab wounds and a perforation to her jugular. They counted 39 blunt force injuries, including skull fractures and strangulation marks. Defensive wounds on Reagan, including a missing fingertip, showed she had fought desperately for her life and the life of her unborn daughter. Parker used a hammer, a heavy Unity sand jar from Reagan's wedding, and a scalpel. After the assault, she performed a crude cesarean procedure, cutting Reagan from hip to hip and removing baby Braxlyn Sage Hancock and the placenta. Cell tower data placed Parker's departure between 9:09 and 9:14 that morning. At approximately 10:18, Reagan's mother, Jessica Brooks, arrived at the New Boston home and discovered her daughter's body. The infant was transported to McCurtain Memorial Hospital in Oklahoma. Braxlyn Sage Hancock did not survive. The motive behind this unfathomable act traced back to a web of deception that Parker had spun for months. She had undergone a tubal ligation in 2014 and a medically necessary hysterectomy in 2015, making her permanently infertile. But she had concealed this from her boyfriend, Wade Griffin. Parker wore a fake pregnancy belly. She held a gender reveal party. She purchased sonogram images online and staged maternity photo shoots. She faked morning sickness and used pandemic restrictions to prevent Griffin from attending prenatal appointments. Her fabricated due date of September 19, 2020 had already passed, making her increasingly desperate. The night before Reagan's passing, a fire erupted at Griffin's residence, and a bomb threat was called into the hospital, where Parker claimed she would deliver. Investigators believe she orchestrated both incidents to create delays. When hospital staff in Oklahoma examined Parker, they determined she had not given birth. Confronted with evidence of her hysterectomy, she admitted to a physical altercation with Reagan. How does someone construct such an elaborate deception, only to have it unravel through the most violent act imaginable? The trial began on September 12, 2022, in the 202nd Judicial District Court of Bowie County before Judge John Tidwell. Prosecutors Kelly Crisp and Lauren Richards presented a meticulous case. They showed Parker's internet search history, including a video about examining premature infants viewed on the day of the tragedy. A jailhouse informant testified that Parker told a fellow inmate she had held baby Braxlin to Reagan's cheek before leaving and told the child to tell her mother goodbye. The defense did not dispute that Parker had taken Reagan's life. Public defender Jeff Harrelson argued that baby Braxlin was never born alive and therefore could not legally be kidnapped, which would reduce the charge from capital to non-capital. A neurologist testified that Parker's brain was broken. On October 3, 2022. After approximately 1 hour of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on capital charges in kidnapping. The penalty phase lasted 25 days and featured 142 witnesses. On November 9, 2022, after approximately 1 hour of deliberation on the sentence, the jury chose death. Judge Tidwell formally sentenced Parker to death and ordered her transfer to death row. Parker raised 25 points of error on direct appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On November 6, 2025, the court unanimously affirmed her conviction and sentence, rejecting all 25 claims. Her attorneys filed a certiorari petition with the United States Supreme Court on March 6, 2026, arguing unfair trial conditions due to pretrial publicity and gender discriminatory prosecution. As of April 2026, that petition remains pending. Taylor Renee Parker is housed at the Patrick L. O. Daniel Unit in Gatesville, Texas. Her TDCJ number is 999626. No execution date has been scheduled. The devastation Parker left behind cannot be measured in legal documents or appellate filings. A young mother was taken. An infant never drew breath outside her body, and a family in Bowie County carries that weight every single day. But Parker is not the longest-serving woman on any state's death row. That distinction belongs to someone in Alabama, Patricia Blackmon. On the evening of May 29, 1999, Patricia Blackmon placed a call to emergency services in Dothan, Alabama. She reported that her adopted daughter was not breathing. When paramedic Eddie Smith arrived at the mobile home in Houston County, he found a toddler lying on the floor. She was wearing only a diaper and blood-soaked socks. Vomit covered her body. A hematoma swelled on her forehead. At 10:22 that night, she was pronounced dead at Flowers Hospital. Dominiqua Bryant had been in Patricia Blackmon's care for approximately 9 months. The adoption had seemed like a second chance for both of them. Instead, it became a death sentence. The autopsy revealed the full scope of what Dominiqua had endured. Her small body bore multiple blunt force injuries to the head, chest, abdomen, and extremities. Her skull was fractured, her bones were broken, and old healing injuries indicated this was not an isolated incident. This child had suffered prolonged abuse. One piece of evidence proved particularly damning. An imprint of a shoe sole was discovered on the child's chest. Forensic analysis matched that imprint to the sandals Patricia Blackmon had been wearing. Investigators found the child's blood on a broken pool cue, on bedding, on clothing, and on napkins scattered throughout the mobile home. Blackmon's father-in-law had last seen Dominiqua playing normally at approximately 8 that evening. Between that moment and the emergency call, only Patricia Blackmon had custody of the child. What happened during those final hours in that mobile home? The investigation moved quickly. Blackmon was arrested on the same day her daughter passed. In August 1999, she was indicted for capital charges under Alabama statute covering the intentional taking of a child's life under the age of 14. The trial took place in Houston County Circuit Court in Dothan. The prosecution presented the physical evidence. They called paramedics, emergency room doctors, Dominiqua's pediatrician, and the chief medical examiner. The aggravating circumstance presented to the jury was that the act had been especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. The defense argued that the child's death could have resulted from improper attempts to revive her. Witnesses testified to what appeared to be a good relationship between Blackman and Dominiqua. Blackman did not take the stand. The jury convicted Patricia Blackman and recommended death by a vote of 10-2. On June 7, 2002, she was formally sentenced. She was transferred to death row on August 5, 2002. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the conviction and death sentence on August 5, 2005. The rehearing was denied on August 25, 2006, with Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative representing Blackman. The Alabama Supreme Court denied certiorari on October 17, 2008. As of April 2026, Patricia Blackman has been on Alabama's death row for over 23 years. She is housed at Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka and remains the longest-serving woman in that state's death row population. No execution date has been scheduled. Dominiqua Bryant was given a second chance when she was adopted. What she received instead was something no child should ever experience. The woman who was supposed to protect her is still waiting to face the ultimate consequence. But not every woman sentenced to death in Alabama remains there. Some cases take unexpected turns. Shonda Nicole Johnson. In the early morning hours of November 30th, 1997, a man stopped to change a flat tire in the parking lot of Harmony Missionary Baptist Church along Alabama Highway 195 in Walker County. Someone had slashed one of his tires while he was inside a bar in Jasper, forcing him to pull over. He never made it home. Randy McCullough was 29 years old. He was still legally married to Shonda Nicole Johnson, his third wife. Their relationship had deteriorated. He had recently testified before a grand jury, leading to her indictment on bigamy charges. He had filed for divorce and custody of their son just 3 weeks before his passing. That night, Shonda and her fifth husband, Timothy Richards, followed McCullough from the BC Lounge. Richards had been the one to slash the tire, setting the trap. When McCullough stopped in the church parking lot to change it, the couple pulled up behind him. According to Richards' later testimony, Shonda loaded a hunting rifle, shoved it into his hands, and told him to do it, to get it over with. Richards fired a single shot to McCullough's head at close range. As they backed out of the parking lot, Shonda was laughing and smiling. They later disposed of the rifle by throwing it into a river. The motive was layered. McCullough had triggered the bigamy prosecution that threatened Shonda's freedom. He was fighting for custody of their child, and there was talk that McCullough had received a large legal settlement, money that would go to their son, or perhaps to her if something happened to him. David O'Mary, a bank executive driving past the church in the early morning hours, discovered the body. Investigators quickly focused on Shonda, given her known conflicts with the victim. Richards eventually broke down during interrogation and confessed. By 28 years old, Shonda Nicole Johnson had been married 5 times. Her first husband had filed 2 police reports claiming she had tried to take his life. She married her third husband, McCullough, while still legally married to her second. She married her fourth and fifth husbands while still married to McCullough, resulting in the bigamy charges that became the catalyst for everything that followed. How does someone accumulate 5 marriages by age 28 and leave a trail of allegations and bodies in her wake? The trial took place in 1999 in Walker County Circuit Court. Timothy Richards testified in detail about the planning and execution of the act. The jury convicted Shonda of capital charges and recommended death by a vote of 11-1. She was formally sentenced on October 22, 1999. Richards pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for his testimony and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. Detective Joey Vick later stated that Richards would never have spent a day in jail if he had not met Shonda. The appellate history proved complex. In 2005, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals reversed the conviction and ordered a new trial, citing improper admission of prior bad acts evidence. But in 2006, the Alabama Supreme Court unanimously reversed that ruling and reinstated the conviction and death sentence. In 2009, the Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed on remand. Then something changed. Multiple indicators suggest that around 2014, Shonda's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Alabama Department of Corrections records show her housed in general population at Tutwiler rather than the death row unit. Current official death row lists do not include her name among the 5 women under sentence of death in Alabama. However, no official court document or news article confirming the exact mechanism and date of resentencing has been located through public records. As of April 2026, Shonda Nicole Johnson appears to be serving life without parole at Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women. She is no longer classified among Alabama's death row inmates. The exact circumstances of her resentencing remain unconfirmed through primary legal sources. Randy McCullers' family received a measure of accountability, even if the sentence was later modified. But the question of why some death sentences are carried out while others quietly disappear into administrative proceedings remains unanswered. In Alabama, another case raises even more troubling questions about the nature of capital punishment itself. Christy Michelle Scott. On August 16, 2008, at approximately 2:30 in the morning, flames erupted inside a home on Signore Drive in Russellville, Franklin County, Alabama. By the time firefighters arrived, the children's bedroom was engulfed. Christy Scott and her younger son Noah escaped through a bedroom window and fled to a neighbor's home. Her older son Mason, a child with autism spectrum disorder, did not make it out. Neighbor Jennifer Davidson would later testify that when Christy arrived at her door in the middle of the night, she appeared fully clothed with her cell phone in her pocket. Christy told her that Mason was still inside the burning house. The first red flag emerged almost immediately. A smoke detector had been ripped from the bedroom wall. It was found undamaged at the scene, meaning it had been deliberately removed before the fire started. Then investigators discovered the insurance policies. In the months before the fire, Christy Scott had taken out 3 life insurance policies on Mason. A $50,000 policy on May 6th, a $25,000 policy on June 14th, and a $100,000 policy obtained just 12 hours before the flames on August 15th. The total coverage on her child's life approached $175,000. Prosecutors alleged that Christy had drugged Mason with cough syrup, removed the smoke detector, and deliberately set the fire while he slept. The medical examiner confirmed he perished from smoke inhalation and thermal burns. Multiple witnesses testified to disturbing behavior following Mason's passing. At his funeral, Christy reportedly held her daughter and suggested that since Noah had always wanted a baby sister, maybe he could get one now. At the graveside, she asked her husband what he thought about having another child. What kind of mother takes out 3 insurance policies on her child in a span of 3 months, the last one obtained just half a day before his death? Christy Scott was arrested on September 30th, 2008, approximately 6 weeks after the fire. She was indicted on 3 alternative counts of capital charges, including causing death for pecuniary gain, causing death during first-degree arson, and causing the death of a child under 14. The trial began on June 12, 2009, in Franklin County Circuit Court before Judge Terry Dempsey. District Attorney Joey Rushing presented a circumstantial evidence case featuring over 70 witnesses. Christy denied involvement and suggested the fire may have been caused by a faulty television cord. On July 8, 2009, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 3 counts. Christy Scott became the first woman convicted of capital charges in Franklin County history. 3 days later, on July 11th, the jury deliberated on the sentence. They recommended life without parole by a vote of 7 to 5. Only 5 jurors voted for death. Then came the judicial override. On August 5, 2009, Judge Terry Dempsey rejected the jury's recommendation and sentenced Christy Scott to death by lethal injection. He found that the act had been especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. Alabama was one of the last states to permit judicial override, allowing judges to impose death even when juries recommended life. The practice was abolished in April 2017 when Governor Kay Ivey signed legislation ending it. But the new law was not retroactive. Christy Scott remains one of approximately 30 inmates in Alabama who were sentenced to death through judicial override, against the expressed recommendation of their juries. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals unanimously affirmed the conviction on October 5, 2012. The Alabama Supreme Court affirmed in a 5-1 decision on September 26, 2014. The United States Supreme Court denied certiorari on April 20, 2015. Christy filed a post-conviction petition on September 25, 2015, challenging her conviction on ineffective assistance of counsel grounds. No publicly reported resolution has been found. Pending Alabama legislation, House Bill 70, pre-filed for the 2026 session, could allow resentencing of judicial override cases. Similar bills have been rejected in previous legislative sessions. As of April 2026, Christy Michelle Scott is housed on death row at Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. No execution date has been set. She remains subject to a sentence that the majority of her jury did not recommend. Mason Scott was a child who needed protection, not a policy number. The insurance forms bear his name, but the fire consumed more than just a house that night. It consumed whatever remained of innocence in a case that continues to raise questions about how justice is administered. The cases in Alabama represent a particular strand of tragedy, but the Western states hold their own stories of violence and broken systems. If you're liking this video and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We drop new cases every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Wendy Andriano. At approximately 2:15 in the morning on October 8, 2000, Wendy Andriano called a co-worker named Chris and asked him to come babysit her 2 small children. She told him she had a problem and instructed him not to ask any questions. Her husband was on the floor dying, she said, and she had not called for emergency services yet. Joseph Andriano Jr. was 33 years old. He had been diagnosed with adenoid cystic carcinoma in 1998, a rare form of cancer. He was undergoing chemotherapy and had been given approximately 1 year to live. His body was already failing him when his wife decided to finish what the disease had started. The medical examiner would later document a multi-method attack that defied any claim of self-defense. Wendy had first administered sodium azide, a toxic pesticide, likely mixed into cream of mushroom soup. She had ordered a 500-gram bottle online under an assumed name, and gelatin capsules, filled with the substance, were found in a bottle labeled as herbal supplements. Then she struck Joseph at least 23 times in the back of the head with a bar stool. 8 to 10 of those blows could independently have rendered him unconscious. Finally, she stabbed him in the neck with a 13-inch knife. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head combined with the stab wound. When the co-worker urged her to call for help, paramedics arrived at the Ahwatukee apartment complex in Phoenix, Maricopa County. Wendy met them outside. She had changed her shirt and wet her hair. She told them Joseph had a do not resuscitate order. The paramedics left without entering. She called again at 3:39 that morning. This time, paramedics found Joseph in a pool of blood with massive injuries that no terminal illness could explain. The motive traced back to money. Prosecutors alleged Wendy believed she could receive up to $20 million from a 6-0 medical malpractice lawsuit against Joseph's doctors if he passed before the suit went to trial. She had also attempted to obtain life insurance on Joseph by having 2 men impersonate him during required physical examinations, offering one of them $10,000. She had grown tired of caring for her ill husband and had engaged in multiple extramarital affairs. What kind of person poisons, bludgeons, and stabs a man who was already dying? The trial began on August 23, 2004, in Maricopa County Superior Court, before Judge Brian K. Ishikawa. The prosecutor was Juan Martinez, who would later gain national recognition for prosecuting Jodi Arias. Martinez called this act shockingly evil. Wendy testified for 9 days in her own defense. Her story shifted repeatedly. She claimed Joseph had devised the poison plan to end his own suffering. She said Joseph had stabbed himself. She argued she acted in self-defense after confessing to an affair. On November 18, 2004. After approximately 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on first-degree charges. On December 22, 2004, she was sentenced to death. The jury found the act had been committed in an especially cruel manner. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld the conviction and sentence on July 9, 2007, rejecting all 11 issues raised on appeal. In the post-conviction phase, attorneys claimed prosecutorial misconduct and ineffective assistance of counsel. In April 2024, the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ordered the case returned to Maricopa County Superior Court for a post-conviction hearing regarding relief from her death sentence. As of April 2026, Wendy Andriano is housed at the Lumley Unit of Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. Her inmate number is 191593. She is one of 3 women on Arizona's death row. Her case is currently back in state court for further proceedings following the Ninth Circuit's order. No execution warrant has been issued. She has been on death row for over 21 years. Joseph Andriano was already facing his own mortality when his wife decided his death would come on her terms, not the cancer's. The cruelty of that choice echoes through every page of the court record. Arizona's death row holds 2 other women. One of them arrived there through an act of violence driven not by greed, but by ideology. Shauna Ford. Just after 1 in the morning on May 30th, 2009, someone knocked on the door of a home in Aravaca, Arizona, a small desert community roughly 10 miles north of the Mexican border. The people at the door claimed to be law enforcement officers searching for fugitives. Inside that home were Raul Flores Jr., his wife Gina Marie Gonzalez, and their daughter Brisenia, a third-grade student at Sopore Elementary School. By the time the sun rose, 2 of them would be gone. Shauna Ford was the self-proclaimed leader of Minutemen American Defense, a vigilante anti-immigration splinter group that had broken away from more mainstream border watch organizations. She had arrived at the Flores home with 2 accomplices, Jason Eugene Bush and Albert Robert Gaxiola. Their plan was to steal drugs and money they believed were inside, intending to use the proceeds to fund their border operations and purchase a 40-acre property as a base. When the door opened, Bush shot Raul Flores. Gonzalez was shot 3 times in the leg. Brisenia, who had been sleeping on a love seat with her puppy, was awakened by the commotion. According to Gonzalez's testimony, the child pleaded with them not to harm her. Bush fired a single shot to her head at close range. The attackers left, but Gonzalez was not dead. She had survived by pretending her injuries were fatal. When she heard them returning, she armed herself. In the exchange of gunfire that followed, she wounded Bush in the leg. Her call to emergency services saved her life and ultimately brought justice. How does a woman who claims to love her country orchestrate the execution of a child in her own living room? Bush's blood was found at the crime scene, in the getaway vehicle, and on boots at Gaxiola's residence. 2 FBI informants from Colorado reported Ford's plans after learning of the attack. Ford was arrested on June 12, 2009, near Sierra Vista, Arizona. At the time of her arrest, she had Gonzalez's jewelry in her possession, including her wedding ring. The trial took place in Pima County Superior Court in Tucson before Judge John Leonardo. Opening statements began on January 25, 2011. Prosecutors Rick Unklesby and Kelly Johnson presented the case. On February 14, 2011, after approximately 7 hours of deliberation, an 11-woman, one-man jury found Ford guilty on all 8 counts, including 2 counts of first-degree charges, attempted first-degree charges, aggravated assault, burglary, and armed robbery. On February 22, 2011, after approximately 4 hours of deliberation on the sentence, the jury chose death. Ford also received 65 years for the non-capital counts. She became the 3rd woman on Arizona's death row. Jason Bush was also sentenced to death. Albert Gaxiola received life without parole. The Arizona Supreme Court unanimously upheld the convictions and sentence in 2014. In early 2024, Ford's attorneys filed a second amended federal habeas corpus petition, raising 35 claims, including ineffective assistance of counsel. As of mid-2024, the federal case was stayed while her lawyers returned to state courts to exhaust certain claims. As of April 2026, Shauna Ford remains on death row at the Lumley Unit of Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. Federal habeas proceedings are ongoing but stayed. No execution date has been scheduled. Raul Flores was 29 years old. Brisenia was in 3rd grade. They were targeted because of who lived near the border and what Ford assumed was inside their home. The ideology that drove Ford to that doorstep did not distinguish between drug dealers and children. But Arizona is not the only state where women await execution. California's death row holds its own stories of violence and broken childhoods. Maria del Rosio Alfaro. On June 15, 1990, a mother returned home to her residence in Anaheim Hills, California, and discovered something no parent should ever have to witness. Her daughter, Autumn Wallace, was inside the bathroom, surrounded by blood. She had been stabbed 57 times. Autumn was 9 years old. Her father had passed from cancer in 1987. That afternoon, she had been home alone, waiting for her older sister and mother to return from work. When someone knocked on the door, Autumn recognized the visitor as her sister's friend and let her inside. Maria del Rocio Alfaro was 18 years old and severely addicted to heroin and cocaine. She had targeted the Wallace home because she was familiar with it through her friendship with Autumn's older sister. She went there believing the family was out, intending to steal items to sell for drug money. But Autumn was home. Alfaro took a knife from the kitchen, coaxed Autumn into the bathroom, and attacked her. The stolen property, which included a television, VCR, typewriter, telephone, and a Nintendo set, was later sold for approximately $240 to $300. In a later jailhouse interview, Alfaro explained her reasoning in chilling terms. She had to take Autumn's life because the child knew who she was. What calculation reduces a child's existence to the risk of being identified? A fingerprint lifted from the bathroom matched Alfaro's. A blood-stained shoe print at the scene matched her footwear. She eventually confessed during a police-recorded interview. Charges included first-degree charges with special circumstances for committing the act during burglary and robbery, residential burglary, residential robbery, and personal use of a deadly weapon. The trial took place in Orange County Superior Court. Alfaro was convicted in March 1992 on all counts. The first penalty phase jury deadlocked 10-2 in favor of death, resulting in a mistrial. A second penalty phase in April 1992 returned a verdict of death. On July 14, 1992, the judge called this the most senseless, brutal, vicious, and callous act he had ever known. Alfaro was 20 years old at sentencing. She became the first woman in Orange County history to receive the death penalty. The California Supreme Court affirmed the conviction and sentence in 2007. In February 2015, United States District Judge Cormac Carney vacated the death sentence, ruling that California's capital system produced arbitrary results that violated the Eighth Amendment. However, in July 2017, the Ninth Circuit reversed Carney's ruling and reinstated the sentence. Governor Gavin Newsom's execution moratorium, in place since March 2019, prevents any execution from being carried out in California. As of April 2026, Maria del Rocio Alfaro is housed at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Under California's Condemned Inmate Transfer Program, launched in 2024, condemned women are now housed in general population with access to work programs. Alfaro works in the prison laundry and has been continuously incarcerated for over 33 years. No execution is possible under the current moratorium. Autumn Wallace opened her door to someone she trusted. That trust cost her everything. And the woman responsible has now spent more years in prison than Autumn ever spent alive. California holds other women whose crimes involved their own children. One such case became the subject of a legal reversal that changed everything. Dora Luz Buenrostro. On October 25, 1994, children playing near an abandoned post office in Lakeview, California, discovered the body of a young girl. Her throat had been slashed so violently that the knife blade had broken off in her neck. She also bore signs of blunt force trauma to her skull. Her name was Deidre Buenrostro. She was 4 years old, and she was not the only child who would be found. 2 days later, on October 27th, at approximately 6:30 in the morning, Dora Luz Buenrostro drove to the Riverside County Sheriff's substation and reported that her estranged husband was at her apartment with a knife, endangering the children. When police arrived at the San Jacinto residence, they found the bodies of Susana and Vicente Buenrostro covered in blood-soaked blankets with their throats slashed. Susana was 9, Vicente was 8, Deidre had been 4. All 3 children were Dora's biological offspring. The medical examiner documented the extent of the injuries. Susana had 4 stab wounds to the neck, 2 penetrating to the spinal bone, along with defensive wounds on her hand. Vicente had similar throat wounds with defensive cuts on his arms. The children had fought for their lives. Between the 2 dates, something else had occurred. On October 25th, after taking Deidre's life, Dora had driven to her estranged husband Alejandro's residence in Silver Lake, Los Angeles. The couple was intimate. Then she pulled a knife on him, and he called the police. She returned to San Jacinto and took the lives of her 2 remaining children on October 27th. What drives a mother to systematically end the lives of all 3 of her children over the span of 2 days? The prosecution argued the motive was anger and selfishness. Dora had been separated from Alejandro since approximately 1990. He was seeing other women. Prosecutors believed she ended the children's lives to inflict maximum pain on him. Alejandro had an airtight alibi and was ruled out as a suspect. 6 blood samples from Dora's vehicle matched Deidre's DNA. Tire impressions near the abandoned building where Deidre was found matched Dora's car. The trial took place in Riverside County Superior Court before Judge Patrick Magers. Prosecutor Michael Socchio led the case. Defense attorney Jay Grossman represented Buenrostro. On July 23, 1998, the jury found Dora guilty on 3 counts of first-degree charges with multiple special circumstances. She testified against her attorney's advice, maintained her innocence, accused police of framing her, and berated both the prosecution and her own defense attorney. On October 2, 1998, she was sentenced to death. She became the only Riverside County woman on death row. On December 3, 2018, the California Supreme Court issued a unanimous opinion that affirmed the convictions but vacated 2 of 3 special circumstance findings and reversed the death sentence. The reversal was based on the improper excusal of a prospective juror during penalty phase jury selection. The case was remanded to Riverside County Superior Court for a new penalty determination. As of April 2026, no public reporting confirms whether this new penalty trial has been completed. Dora Luz Buenrostro is housed at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Her convictions for taking the lives of her 3 children stand, but her death sentence has been reversed. Under the execution moratorium, no execution is possible regardless of the outcome. Susana, Vicente, and Deidre Buenrostro were caught between 2 parents whose marriage had collapsed. Their mother made them casualties of that collapse. The legal system continues to determine what her punishment will ultimately be. The women on California's death row have been there for decades. One of them has been waiting longer than almost anyone else in the state. Celeste Simone Carrington. In early 1992, a series of burglaries struck businesses across San Mateo County, California. The intruder seemed to know exactly how to get inside, using keys that should not have existed. The common thread was a former janitor who had been fired months earlier but had secretly retained copies of the keys. Her name was Celeste Simone Carrington, and she was about to become a figure of historical significance in Northern California's criminal justice system. Victor Esparza was 34 years old, a janitor at a shoe factory in San Carlos. On January 26, 1992, Carrington entered the building using her stolen key and set off the alarm. Esparza confronted her. She demanded money. He gave her approximately $45 and his ATM card. As she was leaving, she fired a single shot from a .357 Magnum revolver at close range, approximately 6 inches from his head. She had stolen that weapon from a Dodge dealership 9 days earlier. In a statement to police, she would later describe the act as exciting. It made her feel powerful. Carolyn Ann Gleason was 36 years old, a property manager at a real estate office in Palo Alto. On March 11, 1992, Carrington forced entry with a screwdriver and found Gleason still working late. She forced Gleason to her knees and fired a single shot to her head at close range with the same revolver. She took approximately $400, located Gleason's car, found her ATM card and PIN, and withdrew $300 from ATM's Dr. Alan Marks, was 35 years old, a pediatrician in Redwood City. On March 16, 1992, Carrington hid in a closet for hours, waiting for the building to empty. When she emerged, she encountered Dr. Marks. He struggled with her, and she shot him twice, wounding his thumb, shoulder, and forearm. He retreated, locked his office door, and called for help. His survival provided investigators with a direct witness account. What transforms someone from a community college athlete who competed internationally and shot, put into someone who describes taking a life as exciting? Police linked the crimes through the same weapon, identical methods, and ballistic evidence. Carrington was arrested on March 20, 1992, at her home in East Palo Alto. Investigators recovered the weapon, keys to the dealership, Gleason's purse and building key, and medical supplies from Dr. Marks's building. During an extended interrogation, Carrington confessed to both fatal attacks and the attempted attack on Dr. Marks. She faced 14 charges, including 2 counts of first-degree charges, attempted first-degree charges, burglary, and robbery. It was the first time San Mateo County had ever sought the death penalty against a woman. The trial took place in San Mateo County Superior Court. Carrington pleaded not guilty despite her confessions. On June 16, 1994, after 1 day of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 14 counts. On November 23, 1994, after only 2.5 hours of deliberation on the sentence, the jury chose death. Celeste Simone Carrington became the first Northern California woman sentenced to death since 1941. The California Supreme Court unanimously affirmed the conviction and sentence on July 27, 2009, rejecting all major defense arguments. It reversed only 2 minor burglary convictions. A habeas corpus petition alleging ineffective assistance of counsel was reportedly pending as of 2009, but its current status is not publicly confirmed. Governor Newsom's execution moratorium prevents any execution from being carried out. As of April 2026, Celeste Simone Carrington is housed at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, now in general population following the 2024 dismantling of segregated death row housing. She has been on death row for over 31 years. No execution is possible under the current moratorium. Carrington endured extreme childhood poverty and abuse. Her mother left the children alone for days without food, forcing Celeste to beg and scavenge to feed her siblings. Her mother physically harmed the children. Her father harmed her during childhood. She left home as a young adult and moved to California, where she attended community college, excelled at track and field, and competed internationally. She had no prior criminal record before her 1992 crime spree. Victor Esparza was working a night shift. Carolyn Ann Gleason was staying late at the office. Their paths crossed with someone whose desperation had curdled into something darker. The financial motive behind these acts amounted to a few $100s. The cost was measured in lives. 10 women. 10 death sentences. And in each case, a story of lives destroyed on both sides of the crime. The system that sentenced them continues to grind forward, while the families of the victims wait for a justice that may never arrive. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.